I am an old woman now, my hands thin and trembling, my voice slower than it once was, but my memory remains painfully sharp, and that is both my blessing and my curse. On the morning I turned 85, I woke before sunrise in the small wooden house I had lived in for more than half a century, the same house where my children took their first steps, where my husband kissed me goodbye every morning before work, where laughter once filled every corner. That day, the air felt unusually light, almost hopeful, and for reasons I cannot fully explain, I believed something good was going to happen. I baked my own birthday cake. I had done it for years, long after my husband passed, because waiting for others only teaches you disappointment. I chose my favorite blue dress, the one I saved for special occasions, and carefully put on lipstick even though my hands shook. I kept glancing at the clock, telling myself not to expect too much, reminding myself that my children were busy people with demanding lives. Still, deep inside, a fragile hope refused to die. It was my birthday. Surely they would come. When the doorbell rang, my heart raced like it hadn't in years. I opened the door and there they were, my 3 children, standing together, smiling in a way that felt practiced rather than warm. My grandchildren followed behind them, already distracted by their phones. I remember feeling dizzy with happiness, overwhelmed that they had remembered me at all. I wanted to hug them, to tell them how lonely the house had become, but they walked past me without slowing down, heading straight for the table, eating quickly, barely looking at my face. I talked and talked, asking questions, telling stories they had heard before, trying to hold on to the moment, but my words floated in the air unanswered. Then my daughter stood up and said it was time to go. She told me to pack my things. I remember smiling, foolishly thinking they had planned a surprise, that maybe they were taking me somewhere special to celebrate. I did not ask questions. I trusted them. The drive was long. No one spoke. I watched familiar streets disappear, replaced by highways I did not recognize. When the car finally stopped, I saw a sign across the road for a beautiful restaurant, and my heart lifted. I stepped out, but my son called me back, pointing instead to a large building with plain walls and quiet windows. I read the sign slowly, my vision blurring, my chest tightening as the words sank in. Nursing home. That was the moment something inside me broke. They told me my house was sold. They said it was necessary. They said they had debts, that this was best for everyone. They spoke quickly, efficiently, like people closing a business deal, not children abandoning their mother. A nurse greeted me warmly while my children signed papers behind me. They hugged me briefly, promised to visit, and left. None of them remembered to say happy birthday. I stood alone in that unfamiliar room, holding my purse like it was the last piece of my life, realizing that everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made had led me here. That was the day I learned how quietly a family can erase you, and how betrayal does not always come with shouting or anger, but with calm voices, polite smiles, and a locked door behind you. Time did not move normally after that day. Inside that place, hours stretched until they felt heavier than years, and days blended together until I stopped marking them. Every morning I woke up in the same narrow bed, staring at a ceiling that was not mine, listening to footsteps that never belonged to my children. I told myself they would come once things settled, that guilt would eventually pull them back to me. That belief was the only thing keeping my chest from collapsing inward. The staff treated me kindly, but kindness from strangers cannot replace the warmth of your own blood. I watched other residents wait by the entrance every weekend, their faces lighting up when doors opened. Some laughed. Some cried. Some were wheeled away into waiting arms. I remained seated, pretending not to care, pretending I was simply there to enjoy the sunlight coming through the window. Each time the door closed without my name being called, something hollow echoed inside me. At night, memories became louder than the present. I remembered my children as they once were, small hands gripping mine, voices calling for me in the dark. I remembered working 2 jobs while my husband built our business, skipping meals so they could have more. I remembered telling myself that every sacrifice was worth it because family was forever. Lying there alone, I wondered when forever had quietly expired. Weeks turned into months. I called them myself at first. I chose my words carefully, never accusing, never asking for much. Just a visit. Just a phone call. They always sounded rushed. Always promised another time. Eventually, I stopped calling. Pride can survive even when the heart is shattered. I told myself that if they wanted me, they knew where I was. It was during one of those long, colorless afternoons that Calder walked in. He wasn't like the others who came and went with forced smiles. He sat beside me and asked my name as if it mattered. He listened when I spoke, not out of duty, but genuine interest. He laughed at my old stories and didn't check the time. For the first time since my arrival, I felt seen. Calder began visiting every weekend. Sometimes he brought small gifts, sometimes just conversation. He never asked about my children, but one day I told him anyway. The words poured out of me before I could stop them. I expected pity. Instead, he gave me understanding. He spoke about his own family, his wife, his young son who struggled to walk, his quiet fear that he would never be able to afford the care his child needed. That night, as I lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of the woman in the next bed, a decision formed inside me. I thought about everything my children had taken without asking, everything they had sold, everything they had erased. And I thought about this man who gave me something they never had in months of silence. Respect. Presence. Love without obligation. I began to understand something painful but freeing. Family is not defined by blood alone. Sometimes it is defined by who stays when staying offers them nothing in return. By the time winter arrived, I had stopped counting how long I had been there. Snow pressed softly against the windows each morning, covering the world outside in white, while inside everything stayed the same muted shade of gray. I learned the rhythm of the place, the medication cart rolling by, the television murmuring in common rooms, the sound of sighs from people who once had full lives and now shared the same quiet ending. I told myself I was different, that my children would eventually remember who I was to them, but even that thought began to feel like a story I told myself to survive. Calder became my anchor to the outside world. When he walked through the door, my body felt lighter, as if I had been holding my breath all week. He spoke to me as if I still belonged to the world beyond those walls, asking my opinion, telling me about his job, his worries, his small victories. I realized how starved I had been for simple conversation that wasn't rushed or polite. He never treated me like someone waiting to die. He treated me like someone still living. One afternoon, he brought his family with him. His wife was gentle, her eyes tired but warm, and his children stayed close to her side. The youngest boy caught my attention immediately. His legs were thin, his steps uncertain, and I recognized that careful determination in his eyes. I had seen it before, in my own children when they first learned to walk. I said nothing, but my heart ached in a way that felt familiar. After they left, I could not stop thinking about that child. Calder had never asked me for anything, not once. He never hinted. Yet I knew the weight he carried. That night, I sat by my bed and stared at my hands, thinking about the choices I had made my entire life. I had given everything to my children because I believed love was an investment that would one day return to me. Instead, it had left me empty. I remembered something my husband once said, long before illness took him. He told me to always keep something aside, not out of distrust, but wisdom. After he died, I followed that advice quietly, hiding what remained where no one thought to look. Not even my children. I had told myself it was for emergencies. I realized now that this was the emergency. A few days later, I asked Calder to bring me a pen and paper. He looked confused, but he did not question me. I wrote an address from memory, my handwriting shaky but clear. I explained slowly, choosing my words carefully. I told him to go there, to open what he would find, and to use it without guilt. I saw fear in his eyes at first, then disbelief. He tried to refuse. I did not let him. That was the first time in months I felt truly in control of my life. Not because I was giving something away, but because I was choosing who deserved it. When Calder finally nodded, tears in his eyes, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before my husband passed. I did not tell my children. They had already taken what they wanted. What remained was mine to give, and I gave it to someone who saw me not as a burden, but as a human being whose life still mattered. After that conversation, something inside me settled, like a storm finally passing. I did not know what Calder would find, nor how his life would change because of it, but for the first time since I was left behind, I felt useful again. Each morning I woke with a strange sense of anticipation, not for visits from my children, but for the simple comfort of knowing I had done something honest and intentional with what remained of my life. Calder continued coming, though now there was a quiet heaviness in his eyes, as if he carried both hope and fear at once. He never spoke directly about what I had given him. He respected my silence, and I respected his. That unspoken understanding bound us closer than words ever could. When he talked about his son, his voice trembled just enough for me to know how much this mattered. I listened, nodding, praying silently for a future I knew I might not live to see. My children remained absent. Holidays came and went without so much as a card. The staff stopped asking if I expected visitors. They already knew the answer. Strangely, their absence no longer tore at me the way it once had. Pain had a way of dulling itself when it realized it was no longer needed to protect hope. I had stopped waiting. Acceptance is not forgiveness, but it brings its own kind of quiet. One evening, a nurse mentioned that Calder had called earlier to ask how I was doing. I smiled to myself in the dim light of my room. Someone had asked about me. That simple act carried more weight than all the promises my children had ever made. I thought about my husband again, about the man who had loved me without conditions, who had always said that character reveals itself at the end of things, not the beginning. Perhaps this was what he meant. As weeks passed, my body grew weaker. I felt it in my bones, in the way standing up took longer, in the way sleep came too easily and waking felt heavier. I did not fear death, but I feared leaving things unfinished. I asked a staff member for help writing letters. Not to my children. To Calder and his wife. I thanked them for their kindness, for treating an old woman as if she still had value. I told them that knowing them had made my final chapter something worth reading. There were nights when I dreamed of my old house, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of my children laughing in the yard. I woke with tears on my pillow, but not from regret. From clarity. I understood now that love given without return does not disappear, it simply finds another place to rest. I did not know how much time I had left, but I felt ready. Whatever happened next, I had chosen compassion over resentment, intention over bitterness. And in doing so, I reclaimed a part of myself my children had never truly owned. The days began to blur again, but this time they carried a softness instead of despair. I sensed something shifting, not in the walls around me, but in the air itself. Calder came less often for a short while, and though I missed him, I understood. When he did appear again, his face looked different, as if the weight he carried had finally been given direction. He smiled more easily. His shoulders no longer slumped forward. I did not ask questions. I already knew. One afternoon, he held my hand longer than usual. His palm was warm, steady, full of words he struggled to say. He told me his son was responding to treatment. He told me there was progress, real progress, the kind doctors speak about carefully because they are afraid to promise too much. Tears ran down my face without permission. In that moment, I felt richer than I had ever felt owning land, houses, or accounts. I had helped a child walk toward his future. That knowledge filled every empty space inside me. Calder spoke about plans then, quietly, almost as if he feared saying them out loud would break them. He told me he and his wife had found a small house near theirs. He said it would be peaceful, close enough for daily visits, far from the long corridors and closed doors of this place. He said they wanted me there, not out of obligation, but because they wanted me to belong. I listened, smiling, nodding, feeling a strange mix of joy and exhaustion. I wanted to believe I would sit on that porch, watch seasons change, hear children laugh again. But my body whispered truths my heart tried to ignore. I was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Still, I thanked him. I told him I was proud of him. I told him that no matter what happened, he had already given me more than my own children ever had in the end. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels final rather than peaceful. I thought about my life from beginning to end, the choices, the mistakes, the love I poured into others. I did not regret loving my children. I regretted believing love guaranteed loyalty. There is a difference, and it took me 85 years to learn it. I closed my eyes and imagined Calder's son taking his first confident steps. I imagined laughter filling a home that welcomed kindness. I imagined my story ending not in bitterness, but in meaning. When sleep finally took me, it was gentle. I never woke up again. Calder arrived the next day. I was told later how he stood in the hallway, confused at first, then devastated when the nurse spoke. He had come to take me home. Instead, he stood holding plans that no longer had a place to land. I wish I could have told him not to grieve too long. I had already left this world lighter than I had entered it. If this is the last thing you hear from me, know this. We do not measure our lives by how long we are remembered by those who share our blood, but by the lives we quietly change when no one is watching. I speak to you now from a place beyond anger, beyond waiting, beyond the endless question of why. When my story found its way into the world, it did not come from my children's mouths. It came from Calder's hands, shaking slightly as he wrote, trying to honor a woman who was never meant to disappear quietly. He shared what happened not for revenge, but for truth. And truth has a way of traveling farther than blood ever does. My children learned of my passing through that story. They learned what I had done with the last thing I owned that truly mattered. They learned that I had given it away not out of weakness, but clarity. I am told they were shocked, angry even, that what they believed was theirs had never belonged to them in the way they assumed. What they never understood is that inheritance is not guaranteed by birth, but earned by presence. I do not know if guilt followed them into their nights. I do not know if they ever stood still long enough to hear my absence echo back at them. But I do know this. While they were chasing comfort, status, and control, I was learning something far more valuable in the final year of my life. I learned that dignity can survive abandonment. I learned that kindness from a stranger can outweigh decades of obligation. I learned that being old does not mean being invisible unless others choose to look away. Calder's son walks now. Not perfectly. Not without effort. But he walks forward, and that is enough. Sometimes that is all any of us are really asking for. A chance to move forward because someone believed we were worth the cost. Knowing that I played a small part in that future gave my ending a meaning my beginning never promised. If you are listening to my story, I ask you to remember something simple but easily forgotten. One day, time will strip away your titles, your strength, your excuses. What will remain is how you treated those who could no longer give you anything. Parents do not raise children as investments. And children do not lose their humanity when life becomes busy. I was an old woman who was left behind. But I was also a woman who chose how her story would end. And if my voice still reaches you now, then perhaps I was never truly abandoned at all.